Hi, welcome to Ask the Expert. We are here to talk about Azure Kubernetes Service, and this is part of our ongoing celebration of Cloud Native New Year. If you're not aware of what that is, go to aka.ms/CNNY, and you can find some great blog posts, other events, things that are going on. But let's get started with today's Ask the Expert. I'm Steve Morawski. I'm on our cloud advocacy team, and I focus on cloud native technologies. And I am joined today by our expert, George Palma. George, why don't you introduce yourself? Let folks know kind of what you do and what your background is, and then we can get into some questions.
Sure. Thanks, Stephen. My name is Josh Palma. I'm the lead PM for Azure Kubernetes Service, and really looking forward to starting engaging with some of your questions and pressing topics about Kubernetes and AKS.
Wonderful. So if you haven't already, we are live on YouTube and Twitch. And so please add your questions there. If we don't get to your questions live, we will have folks in the chats, both on Twitch and on YouTube, to answer any questions that we don't get to. All right, let's dig in. So, George, how can I get AKS and Azure to simplify my development process using Kubernetes, right? Like that's a big topic, and a lot of folks are kind of hesitant to getting into it.
Yeah, and it historically been a shift from, I would say, traditional development practices of just like, when you're creating binaries that you then just deploy in VMs and on other services. How does that paradigm shift to containers, and then with Kubernetes to actually run those in production has been, I would say, a journey up until where we are today. And AKS and Azure have a number of actual tools and processes and guidance to help you from the absolute getting started when you have your own, let's say, Git repository and GitHub that has nothing but your source code, which is really what you should be focusing about on, and Draft, something like Draft, which is our open source tool that we created, can actually bootstrap that repository to actually get all the manifests, the Docker file, anything that you need to deploy, to make that code containerized, and then to deploy that into a Kubernetes cluster, for example, any Kubernetes cluster like AKS, in just 2 commands. And it will even help you actually create a GitHub action and set it up, set the pipeline all automatically for you, so that you can start to do PR-based development and actually get that deployment across every time that you ship any change. That's just one of the key things that we're doing. You can do it in the UI and portal. We have, obviously, as I mentioned, both GitHub and ADO, Azure DevOps, to really help you with all the tools integrated, several actions for Kubernetes and for AKS. We have our plugins in VS Code. If you're a VS Code user, I know a lot of you folks are heavy VS Code users. There's the Kubernetes extension there. There's the AKS developer extension there that I would kind of urge everybody to check it out. And that has all of these tools baked in. That just at one click from the command palette, just say, hey, get me this code into Kubernetes, and it will guide you through the process and it will help you do that the right way.
That's awesome, because one of the things I keep finding is that folks are interested in Kubernetes, but there's a lot of new concepts, and so the barrier to entry can seem high. And so having tools like that, having tools like Draft, having the things that are built into Visual Studio Code, can really help kind of reduce that barrier to entry. Now, barrier to entry, great. We're solving some of those problems. But one of the things, especially in an economic environment like today, I would love to lower that total cost of running my cluster. Is there a way that I can use AKS to lower my TCO to lower my operational costs for running a Kubernetes cluster?
Yeah, and I think that's a huge deal right now for a lot of our users. Is how to actually lower that. I think these are two different aspects. Even the actual cost of just like running the actual infrastructure, the actual electricity almost, and then the actual operational costs that you have to spend, your cycles of the actual users, of the actual operators. And AKS and Azure can help in a number of ways. Kubernetes as a pillar already allows for that. Cost lowering and actually better bin packing of applications, better density, and actually starting to help you take the most out of containers, actually take the most out of your infrastructure, versus a more coarse infrastructure in either VMs or servers as you are. Now, on Azure, and kind of combining both power of Kubernetes and Azure, we didn't have things like spot VMs. We have things like fit for purpose queues. We have things like savings plans, and reserved instances or capacity reservations. And all of this allow you to actually make a plan for how your spend is going to go, how you can actually minimize it and optimize it for your peaks. Obviously, all the capabilities about the scaling that a cloud infrastructure will give you, from vertical scaling to horizontal scaling and responding to demands based on all kinds of metrics, from traditional CPU and memory to if it's a web app or HTTP requests, or if it's something that is heavy on connections, a number of connections as an example. And you can actually be very, very fine-tuned, very granular about how you actually are using your infrastructure, scaling your infrastructure, and optimizing your infrastructure. And from an operational perspective, that's been, as you kind of alluded to, Kubernetes hasn't been the easiest tool to operate. It's been a great tool for applications, for scalability, for resiliency. But from an operator perspective, it required some knowledge. It required some actual know-how and understanding of how to do that, how to operate it properly to achieve those goals. And we've been working hard across the last few years, and we're still doing that in order to simplify that for these operators, about how you actually can, with things like auto upgrade or auto scale or auto drain, kind of all our auto star type of features that we have in AKS. How can you actually defer most of the typical operations that you have to do to AKS, and actually
Mhm.
rely more and more on the platform to avoid having to spend your own cycles and focusing on things like actually building value for the business, building more applications, creating new ideas, and really focusing on that.
So that stuff's great, right? Like the auto scaling, the auto upgrade, all of those operational tasks, uh, being able to uh, being able to provide some value add service on top, uh, can really help out in our operational matters. I want to go back to one of the things you mentioned first, just so we can get a definition out there for it. You mentioned bin packing. Could you tell us just a little bit about what that is, and then why that's important in our cost, in the cost scenario?
Yeah, definitely, and it's a term that it became second hand, second nature for me. So thanks for bringing that up. That's definitely one that we now use as a quick shorthand. So by bin packing, typically what I mean is usually you're um, have like service or application for VM type of one-to-one relationship. Sometimes a few, but you can't really deploy a number of different services to different VMs. Otherwise, they might start to conflict, to eat each other's resources, to not have any ability to actually be properly um, kind of segregated and isolated there from each
Mhm.
other. With containers, you actually get to have all of these things there. Sometimes you can even have conflicts. You have different versions of a specific framework or different versions of binaries or libraries, and they could conflict, and you can have one installed. But with containers, that kind of shifted, where all the applications actually have their own world inside of that container, all their dependencies, all their libraries, even their own OS if they need so. And that then allows you to actually put a lot more um, for in a VM than you could do with processes, because now you have all the libraries, all the dependencies there.
Mhm.
There's no conflicts, and you actually can maximize what's on that VM a lot more than with processes, because you have a way to actually control the resources that these applications are going to be using, the CPU, the memory, and actually try to isolate them from each other while still coexisting a lot more harmoniously than you would do in a VM. So you're able to pack more applications into a VM is typically what we mean by bin packing.
Wonderful, yeah. That's definitely a useful thing, right? I'm a sysadmin from way back, and I remember having to, we spun up, or we'd have a physical machine for every application at first, and then we could do virtual machines for every application, and that idea of being able to effectively run multiple different workloads without having those conflicts, that's a that's a game changer. So another question for you, George. So some of these we might kind of jump around a little bit because we got lots of questions from people in different areas of AKS. Any idea if flexible VM scale sets will come to AKS?
Ah, well, a question from, I guess, one of our Azure users for sure. So
Yeah.
VM flexible skill sets is basically a new mode for virtual machine skill sets, which is this concept of groups of VMs that Azure has. And historically, that has been what we now call uniform mode, which is kind of all the VMs inside of that skill set behave, look, are like one, like a very specific case, which involves, for example, their SKUs, their sizes. So they're all from the same, exact granular properties. With flexible, you actually are able to pack different VMs and different types of VMs with different characteristics into a same skill set. You can still, for example, start adding into that skill set and do some of the operations like load balancing and things like that in a unified manner. But they're actually not anymore a uniform group. They could be like a course group. Going to the question now. On when they'll be available on AKS. So on AKS, we actually have the concept of node pools, which can have multiple per cluster. So you can actually already achieve a lot of the same benefits that you have in Flex of mixing these different SKUs and things like that in the same, logical construct of a VMSS. In that case, in AKS, the VMSS doesn't really play a role. It's all about the node pool and the cluster. And inside of a cluster, you can already have all kinds of node pools with all kinds of sizes and properties. We are looking into VM skill set flex in order to achieve things like multiple SKUs inside of a node pool, as an example. Um, but that actually requires additional logic that goes beyond what Flex has today, which basically is a lot more of a manual operation of like getting a VM, adding into a skill set, creating a VM, adding into a skill set. And that's not really the experience, once again, that we want for operators in AKS. We want that to be simple. And so we're actually working with the skill sets team to actually create these type of experiences where you can actually pack multiple SKUs into a skill set, but also be controlling how that scales, how that expands, and how it plays with other skill sets, the auto scaling capabilities, so on and so forth. In terms of a timeline, this is a bit more of an implementation detail. So there will be several pieces of this that are landing over the next couple of months.
So what I really like is that um, using node pools, you can accomplish a lot of the similar objectives today, and that it also gives you a way to try out some different features. So I'll just make a little plug for one of the features I really like with node pools, and that is the preview of the WASI node pools. So the
Mm-hmm.
WebAssembly stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
that lets you try out a whole new experience on
Yeah.
AKS in running WebAssembly workloads. So, but I won't rabbit hole us there because I would love to just spend time talking about that. But um, we got questions from our audience, and it's not just what's Steve want to talk about today. So
Maybe we could talk about that a bit more at the end and maybe rat hole a bit if you want.
sounds good. So how about are there any plans to support descheduler for Kubernetes to help keep node costs down?
Yeah. Good question. So Descheduler, for those of you that might not be aware, is part of kind of the open source projects that are in the Kubernetes ecosystem. And as scheduler schedules pods, descheduler is the name kind of denotes it actually deschedules them. So kind of evicts them and forces that scheduling to happen again. This can be helpful on cases where, for example, you might have unbalanced clusters or unbalanced things due to their rules. So you might have soft affinities and actually you place a pod on something that is not the best, absolute best infrastructure for it, then you can run descheduler and force it to go through the schedule process again and put it in the actual best infrastructure, more suited and more cost effective in the case of costs. We are thinking of that. We have uh, another thing in place. We call it auto provision as its name, that actually will allow you and will have some of these capabilities of descheduler mostly from an infrastructure perspective. Today autoscaler already will look at VMs and look at them and say, okay, they are underused and I'm scale it down, but it won't be able today to provision, let's say, a better suited VM with a better suited SKU for those. So if you reduced, let's say you have 10 VMs and you have them all packed and suddenly one of them gets to half capacity, close autoscaler could scale them down if those pods are able to fit on the rest of the VMs. But if they aren't, it's going to just stay there. And descheduler in that case also will try to do that and better bin packet. But still, if they don't fit, then these two things, cluster autoscaler and descheduler, won't do it. So what we actually are planning to launch with this auto provision capabilities is actually the ability to spin up maybe a new SKU that maybe has a few more cores, but allows you to actually reduce the total number of cores and to reduce your bill as well. And that can actually fit all the pods there. And so if you had 10 VMs and one of them is half capacity, maybe you can go to 8 VMs with a slightly bigger SKU and actually utilize them at 90% capacity in that case. That is something that is part of that set of features that I mentioned that are coming up in the next couple of months that are also tied to Flex and some of these things.
That is that is a really interesting feature set. Now you mentioned soft affinity, and so I just wanted to make sure that folks were aware, like when we're defining workloads in Kubernetes, we can define some affinities and anti-affinities, and so that we can make sure that certain apps play so that they play together nicely, or if we know they don't play together nicely, that they that they're not in the same area, right? So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and so the all of that auto scaling mechanisms and this all the scheduling has to take in those affinities, those into account. So sometimes we might see some nodes getting underutilized. So it's awesome to see that there's work in progress to be able to effectively recommend a better set of SKUs
Hmm.
for the VMs that you're running on
Hmm.
to most efficiently use it. I think that's huge.
Yep. And we also
Um,
have in preview something like a vertical pod autoscaler that is sometimes there's this two different levels. So we just tackled
yeah,
basically the infrastructural level of it that actually allows you to have something like VMs, again, going into different sizes and different SKUs. But we
yep.
also have VPA that could actually recommend the actual resources and limits that you can put on actual deployments and pods to understand, to both monitor them and then make you recommendations on like, hey, maybe you should actually reduce the requests you have on these spots because they're never nowhere near that. And you could actually, again, by reducing that into a smaller footprint, you can actually, again, pack more of these pods into the same VM and allow the infrastructure to actually kind of scale back and scale in.
Very cool. All right, so I've got another question here for you. And the environment is one of the things that's pretty front of mind for a lot of folks. And in that discussion, we hear about carbon footprint. Will AKS help me reduce my carbon footprint, or are there things that we can do with AKS to help reduce our carbon footprint?
That's a very interesting topic and one that kind of it's close and dear to me. But the answer is yes. So right now, a lot of capabilities are coming into Azure and into even the power grids of multiple countries and different geographies to actually help you start to look at how your application, how your footprint from a software perspective and infrastructure perspective is contributing. Is how many what's the degree of the carbon emissions that is actually uh, using and taking effect, and then things that we have today, such as the capabilities I mentioned before on the auto scaling front,
Mhm.
but also on how you scale. As example, we have something called CADA, which is a Kubernetes event-driven autoscaler, and basically builds on top of the default HPA, horizontal pod to scale, that scales pods and applications. Um, but it does so, HPA does so in a very, memory and CPU centric manner,
Yep.
whereas Skate actually allows you to go to pretty much anywhere. So you can scale based on all kinds of metrics, HTTP, and it allows you to do a lot of different things like scheduling, like going to zero. So as an example, you can use Kata to attack kind of your Kubernetes infrastructure in a more serverless pattern way, and with more serverless patterns, where you can actually have your application literally at zero and your infrastructure could also be at zero for that, it's a node pool in that application, which is again one of those interesting concepts of using a node pool for that. And once an event comes in, let's say something goes into a queue or a service bus, that actually will have Kata spin up the pod from 0 to 1, 0 to 2, whatever is necessary, and the infrastructure can follow that, and you can go. So you can literally use things like Kata to actually adjust your infrastructure in a much more carbon saving approach, and we're developing a lot of things in conjunction with the hardware teams in Azure, in conjunction with the CNCF, the Cloud Native Compute Foundation, for things like CADA, working with several partners like Intel, Red Hat, with the Green Software Foundation, to actually achieve a lot of cool functionality for you to actually be able to both set and be able to achieve your carbon emission goals that I know a lot of you are kind of pretty stoked about,
Yep.
sinking your teeth into those. And we're really happy to kind of start supporting you there. So we already have guidance on how to actually architect to do some of the things that I've mentioned. There's so many things that you can start doing today. And we have some very cool features coming up in the next couple of months that will actually set this to another level. We actually are going to be able to see your carbon emission. We're actually going to be able to, target different regions and different hardware based on their carbon emissions, different
Huh.
hours of the day where the power grid is less constrained, and that will help you do that.
Yeah, that's a fantastic thing. It's because, while not every workload is able to run in every region due to, whatever business or governmental constraints you may have, having the option for those that do, and having that visibility, because not all power grids are the same, not all not all costs are equal everywhere, right? And so being able to have some visibility into that to help make those decisions, so you don't necessarily have to go out and try to figure out, okay, in this region this is the source, and try your best guess at these things. So I love seeing the different ways that we tackle some of these problems, and then try to, surface that in a helpful, but not, you know you're not being forced into this fashion, right?
Overbearing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. There you go. That's a better word. There's a reason you're the paid professional and figuring out figuring out these terminologies. I just get to talk to folks and play with sample code and that kind of stuff. All right. So, um, one of my teammates has been doing a lot of work in this particular area, working with the open source community, working with some folks on the product team. But the area I'm talking about is secure supply chain, right? And so secure supply chain is a critical topic for cloud native applications. How can that be accomplished with AKS and Azure?
Oh, also big topic.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's something where the community, I think many industries, many of our users are putting a lot of effort into, is the notion of both shifting left and looking more at their supply chain, especially as you adopt a lot of open source projects, which is now kind of a de facto standard in order to,
Yep.
get accelerate, have velocity, get all the goodness from community projects, community run projects, and open governed projects that are just like Kubernetes, just have tremendous innovation poured into them, kind of daily, in a vibrant community. But one of the things that is critical as you start to do that as an enterprise, as a business, is how you're actually able to make sure that your supply chain, your full software supply chain, is secure. And so there's many things that we're doing in that area and that we already launched, from partnering with folks in CNCF to ensure that we have things like image signing, or several security and guardrail tools like Gatekeeper up to speed to actually be able to help you um, secure supply chain. Things on several of our products like Azure Container Registry, that allows you to both get images from any location in the web and kind of mirror them, and enable you to run scans on them, and then only then promote them to make them available to your organization. The ability to automatically patch base images based on known vulnerabilities. Also Azure and Microsoft Defender, the ability to actually scan those images both in the registry but also runtime, find vulnerabilities, allowing you to automatically enforce fixes to them, as well as just notify users if there's any given vulnerability. AKS on its own, we have a commitment of actually ensuring that all our system images are patched weekly, and in some cases nightly, for any known vulnerability of any known fix that any of the vendors or any of the projects have shipped. We are in all of those communities and all those projects, so we are very, very big. We're very involved and we're very big contributors to those projects in security aspects. As an example, we're currently part of the co-chairing the SIG security for Kubernetes, and that's definitely something in some of the areas that we are extremely conscious about, and that we want to really make sure our users have, a super ironclad type of service and way to have their applications super secure.
Very cool. Yeah, I love the shift left stuff, especially. But for folks who want to dive it more into that secure supply chain topic, more most specifically that image signing and gatekeeper side of things, um, check out that aka.ms/cnny. We've got a blog post later this week, so that'd be tomorrow, coming out covering that particular topic, including doing that through a pipeline in GitHub Actions with signing images and publishing that. All right, we've got a few more questions here that we want to hit. We've got a few minutes left, so. Um, Here's a question, and this is kind of community related. Uh, when will the AKS office hours be coming back?
That's a good one. Shout out to our community there, and to our friends at the Global Black Belt team that actually set those up first place for our MVPs that actually helped a lot with those and participated there. So great question, and actually a topic that we've been discussing very recently. The answer is yes. They will be coming back. We're literally working throughout the format and how they're going to be, but we're very, very, very excited to kind of connect back in a again, maybe to explain it for everyone that might not know what I'm talking about or what the question is all about. The AKS team and the Global Black Belt team at Microsoft that covers Kubernetes and cloud native. I used to run these monthly office hours thing, monthly or biweekly office hours, where basically everybody was welcome to join, listen in, discuss topics, architectures, solutions that were implemented, listen about the roadmap, again, ask any questions, just basically bidirectional interaction between Microsoft, the AKS teams, and our users. And we're planning to bring that back 100%. We hope that do that very, very soon. And so stay tuned in our GitHub, in our channels, and we'll be communicating on that fairly soon.
And George, if my team can help at all, we'd be happy to participate there as well. If not, we'll just come and hang out with everyone. So, because
Absolutely.
yeah, that's a good time. I definitely enjoy the office hours. Now, for folks who are dipping their toes in, or they've been running Kubernetes stuff for a while, um, do we have any best practices for running our AKS clusters?
Yeah. In fact, I think part of what we're doing now is trying to bake a lot of those best practices into the actual product and ensure that you don't even need to know about them that much. So on one hand, our architecture center, some of the blogs that you mentioned that we're launching both this week and that we have in our documents have contained a lot of that. We have best practice sections for, securing your cluster, or, deploying in different regions and achieving the highest possible HA configuration. Could be, again, securing your supply chain, day two operations monitoring. So you have all these different sections there in our docs and our architecture center that I definitely suggest that you check out. A lot of the things that we're doing now as well is actually trying to bake a lot of those into just the getting started experiences and making these
Mhm.
super easy for you to do. So if you go to the Azure portal as an example, you're able to create a cluster pretty quickly. And one of the things you'll see there is our presets that actually allow you to automatically set several of these things with one click. So you can get, a production enterprise cluster that has all kind of the security hardenings and security controls and policy that a typical enterprise environment needs. And at the same time, you could easily go onto the second one and click dev and test and get a pretty, bare bones cluster just really quickly for you to test something, kick the tires on something.
So we've got just a few seconds left.
I don't
So
know. I was having so much fun.
I know, me too. But what's most top of mind for new things for AKS for the future? What's your most favorite?
Ooh,
And we got
for
about 30
AKS features. So
seconds.
there's quite a lot of very interesting things launching. So definitely, I mentioned already some things on the sustainability side that we're launching, on the scaling side, on the development side that we're going to get pretty cool announcements later up at our build conference in May. We're going to have KubeCon where we're going to be talking about really cool stuff, and I would definitely encourage everybody listening in that if you can stop by,
All right.
both physically and virtually in Amsterdam. We're going to have a pre-day to go about all the things that we're launching. Behind me, I think I can see something that we're actually announcing pretty soon, which is kind of the ability to do better pod sandboxing. So we're pretty excited about that and about how we're
All
going to
right.
be enabling multi-tenancy further.
Thank you so much, George. I appreciate it so much. Thank you all for joining us today. And stay tuned at AKAMS CNNY for more great content for Cloud Native New Year.